Hi, everyone. Welcome to our NAMI member community forum on the Care Court. As many of you know, we have been supportive of this initiative since the governor had announced back in early March. So much has happened since then, and it just came to our attention as our members were getting more involved and hearing more about it that we really needed to take a deeper dive and to get more information about the intention of Care Court, what it is not, and also what process it is in the legislative process and what's happening next. And so we invited the Deputy Secretary for Behavioral Health, Stephanie Welch, from the California Health and Human Services Agency. And we also have with us NAMI California's lobbyist and legislative connoisseur, Danny Offer, who will be helping us along the way for what process we need to take next. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. We have over 500 participants on this webinar. I'm going to go through just a few of the housekeeping things first. I'm Jessica Cruz. I am the CEO of NAMI California. We are in webinar format, which means that you'll hear a lot from us. And if you have any questions, there's a question and answer box that you can ask anything to us. And then we will have a session at the end of this webinar after Stephanie and Danny have given their thoughts. Where they'll be able to answer questions. If we can't get to your question, it's either because so many moving parts, we don't have the answer for you yet, or we've run out of time. And if that's the case, then we will make sure that we answer you via a text or email of some sort. So without further ado, we're going to actually see who's in the room, so to speak. And so we're going to have you guys get your phone out, and we're going to use what we call the Mentimeter. And Ragini, if you can go ahead and share the instruction page. So if you get your phone and you go to mentimeter.com, we're going to put kind of the instructions on here. What it does is it allows us to gather information about who's in the room, who you are, who you represent, so that we can gather without having to go around with every person, who you are and who you represent. So go to mentimeter.com, and the code that you enter is 58644603. So you go to menti.com, excuse me, not Mentimeter, MENTI.com, and you enter in the code 58644603. You can use your smartphone, you can use your tablet, you can open in your browser that you're watching this webinar on. I'll give you a couple minutes just to go ahead and go through that. Okay, so now hopefully everybody's at menti.com using the code. We're going to go ahead and ask our first question, which is, which county are you representing? And as you guys start answering the questions, they're going to start popping up here. So we have Butte, Mendocino, Santa Clara, Tulare, Solano, Sacramento, Los Angeles, Santa Clara, Santa Cruz, Ventura, Sonoma, Fresno, San Diego. Is there more scrolled down there, Ragini? Calusa, Stanislaus, Yolo, San Francisco. We have a great representation of all of California so far. San Bernardino, San Mateo, Solano Placer, Alameda, Riverside. We have almost, we're doing really good. Ventura, Siskiyou, wonderful. Nevada County, great. So wonderful. Thank you all so much for being here. We have representation basically from Northern California, Southern California, Central, Bay Area, Eastern, great. So our next question we have for you is, Go to the next question, Raggedy. Please check what role, any role that you identify with. Are you a peer individual living with a mental health condition, a family member, caregiver? Do you represent a NAMI affiliate, medical professional, community-based organization, county, city, educator, faith leader, student? Lots of family members, good amount of peers. Wonderful. Community-based organizations, mental health providers. Nice. Well, 40 affiliates, this is great. NAMI members, it's wonderful. Having a NAMI member forum for our members and our supporters, something that's important to us to provide you guys information. So thank you all who are NAMI members. NAMI supporters. It's great. So majority of us are family members, caregiver, parents, representing affiliates, community-based organizations. We have a good handful of peers and individuals, which is wonderful. State and county employees, which is great. Faith leaders and students, educators. Wonderful. We have one more question after this. If applicable, what organization are you representing? Are you representing a NAMI affiliate? Which community-based organization are you representing? Which county are you representing? Great. Wonderful. NAMI, Painted Brain, Children Partnership. Great. Blue Shield, Kaiser, NAMI Placer, MHALA, Orange County. Great. It's wonderful to see so many NAMI supporters with us today. Wonderful. We have a great representation of individuals and family members. We have people from various different community-based organizations. So happy for all of you to join us today. Wonderful. Okay. 152 responses so far. This is wonderful, you guys. Thank you so much. So now that we know kind of who's in the room, we're going to now move into the main meat of our program, and that's to hear from Stephanie Welch, who again is the Deputy of Behavioral Health, Deputy Secretary, excuse me, for Behavioral Health at the California Health and Human Services Agency. And she's really just going to go through, again, what it is, what is care court and what it's not, and what the intent of it is. And then Danny will go into kind of what's next in the legislative process and then how we can all get involved. And if you have questions throughout, please submit them through the Q&A. I will gather them. And then at the end, we will make sure that we try and get as many questions answered as we possibly can. So Steph, do you want to go ahead and take it over?
Sure. And I know that you guys are going to help me with my slides, but good afternoon, everyone. Nice to be with the NAMI affiliates and other NAMI partners and stakeholders. It sounds like we have a really diverse group of folks on the line today. And I also just really want to give a thank you to any and all of you who submitted letters in the last round of when we had hearings. We do read them and they're very powerful. The last few months, I've had a lot of communication, probably from many of you, as well as other stakeholders, and every communication is a lesson learned for us. And I think that's a little bit of the tone of my presentation today. because I am going to talk a little bit about the context in which we're in this really rapidly changing environment around behavioral health, because it is one of the top priorities of the administration. So we have been implementing many, many different initiatives. And I think I just wanted to run through a few of them, because what I'm acknowledging is that we feel like Care Court is a critical additional tool that we want to create and need to create, but it's not the one and only initiative, transformational approach that we're trying to take to really rapidly improve Californians' access to high quality behavioral health care. So welcome. It's glad to be here. Let's go to the next slide. So for those of you who have been following California's behavioral health policy changes in the last couple of years, it has been quite a roller coaster, and that has been in the midst of managing a pandemic. And so it really has been an incredible time for really critical investments in behavioral health. And I think the other thing that's really exciting about what we're doing here in California is that we're not just building out our ability to respond to people who have mental health conditions, but really doubling down on addressing substance use disorders and bringing our capacity to deliver high quality evidence-based care in that space. And so do want to lift that up, but also recognize that because mental health conditions have been so stigmatized, we really are suffering from decades of really fragmented care and reduced investments. And so we're going to make incredible progress, but we are going to do it over time. And very excited to talk about a couple of those things real quickly. So next slide. So in January, we published through our Department of Healthcare Services a behavioral health needs assessment. And I have a hyperlink at the bottom of the slide deck there. But if you Google behavioral health continuum infrastructure, I'm sure it'll come up. But and the report will be housed in that space. But I think, it was really telling. And I think many of the things that we've been hearing around the state, and in particular from our family members and peers, were some of the things I've highlighted on this slide. And now we have really some good, well-documented evidence to really show that we really have a very fragmented system of crisis care in the state, that there isn't really a kind of a comprehensive approach of what do we do to prevent and address people who are experiencing crisis. So that was definitely something that we learned. It's not something that we didn't think that was happening, but now we have a pretty well documented report to show that we need to invest in that space. Also, and I think really important for this conversation today, is that there just was really just a dearth of community-based living options. There just simply weren't the scope and breadth of what was needed to really support people, and in particular, people who have more serious and chronic conditions, whether it be serious mental illness or living with a substance use disorder. People really needed long-term housing options and long-term residential treatment in many cases. And that was simply just lacking across the state. We are not going to spend time on it today, but as you guys know, we've been doing a lot of work in the space of expanding behavioral health services for children and youth, and it continues to be an area where we need to make investments. It was very evident in our needs assessment. Certainly, we've talked a lot about this in the wake of COVID, but we all have known it for a long time, and that is that we have tremendous racial and ethnic disparities in access to high quality behavioral health care. And then lastly, we really just recognize that for those individuals who unfortunately were justice involved, They just simply experienced additional challenges if they had a mental health issue. It was even harder to get housing. It was even harder to get employment. And they had even more complex physical health issues in addition to their mental health issues that were not getting treated. So I mention these because these really stood out to us as we started thinking about where do we want to take California's transformation next. Next slide. So these were a couple of the things that we've passed in the last couple of years. I just want to do them as refreshers. We are in the fruit. We have not come to fruition with all of these items, but we are in the process of implementing them. So I think you guys have probably heard a lot about the California Advancing and Innovating Medi-Cal system. I think the easiest way to explain it that I always remember is that we're trying to make people who have Medi-Cal, people who are Medi-Cal beneficiaries, have a more seamless experience and easier access to high quality mental health and behavior and substance use treatment services. Behavioral health in particular is really a focus of the work that we're doing in CalAIM. And this year we're really focusing on our CalAIM Justice Package, which is going to allow us to enroll people in Medi-Cal prior to their return home, as well as actually start their treatment planning while they're in the process of reentry. So super excited about how that's going to hopefully assist us with having the capacity to serve people when they return home and keep them safe and doing well in recovery. I think another thing that's important as background before we launch into this conversation is our $3 billion that was approved last year by the legislature to really build out our behavioral health continuum through infrastructure. And that includes treatment facilities, but it also includes wellness centers, residential placements, crisis services, and also for our community care expansion program, really looking at building out, therapeutic enriched board and care environments, because we know that there is a population that has a really high need, and then that is an appropriate and helpful living situation where they can also get their treatment needs addressed. And of course, so much advocacy done by the people who are engaged in NAMI's advocacy around peer support services and the new peer support benefit in Medi-Cal. Really excited about implementing that this summer. Next slide. So we also have done a lot of thinking about our crisis care continuum, and I think it's important to talk about the crisis care continuum. We talk about Care Court. You all, in many of the conversations we've had, have brought to our attention how important it is to make sure that we are supporting our first responders with resources, training, especially training in trauma-informed care. But we also really have been thinking as a state, how are we going to implement the 988 system? How do we do a better, more comprehensive, or provide more comprehensive approaches to preventing crisis in the first place? And so really excited to be doing work in that space. Next slide. So those were some of the things we worked on last year. And I think when we got ready to think about this upcoming year, the year that we're in the proposed budget, we really felt kind of compelled by, like things like the needs assessment, et cetera. Much of the work we've been doing in this space of trying to prevent individuals from being deemed IST and unfortunately spending time in jail rather than in community-based placements. But we really were thinking we really need to double down on something we believe deeply in. I think in other town halls that I've visited, you've heard me say this. This administration believes that people, including people with very serious and persistent mental illness, absolutely can live in the community with the right community supports. And we really want to double down on making sure that those most vulnerable communities, whether it be someone with a very serious mental illness or somebody who's justice involved, is a immigrant, is somebody who is aging, that we really are doing what we can to address the underlying inequities that they're facing, but also to really provide the level of care that is needed for folks who are experiencing both intense healthcare needs as well as intense social welfare needs. Next slide. So some of the things that we have proposed this year, which we're still very much in the middle of the process, we are pursuing the enhanced federal match that will be available to create Medi-Cal community-based mobile crisis response services. Really excited about this. This is part of our building out of our behavioral health care crisis continuum, and think that that'll be incredibly helpful in making sure that people who are experiencing a mental health crisis get the right response and hopefully get referred to the best place that works for them and their needs. We are continuing to do a lot of work in building out our capacity to kind of deliver on CalAIM in our enhanced care management and community supports program, and giving financial incentives to really build up that capacity. And also really investing some of our opioid settlement funds on addressing fentanyl risk and expanding MAT. Next slide. And I would be remiss, because I think I've talked probably as much about workforce this year as I've talked about care court, if not more. It's something I'm very passionate about as well. And we do have a new workforce proposal this year. This is in addition to our $800 million proposal that passed last year as part of the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative. This year's proposal is $1.7 billion and is really focusing on what we're calling the care economy workforce. So kind of the whole broad range of professionals that serve people who are in our programs here at Health and Human Services. So we have our initiative to build out 25,000 new community health workers. We're investing in and expanding and trying to really innovate social work practices, investing in building out our psychiatric residency program, and probably most importantly, the undertone of all of these efforts in the way that they will be designed and then administered is to expand our multilingual and diverse populations, expand our ability to reach them, support them, and bring them all the way through the process as far as they want to go to have a well rewarding and compensated job in the healthcare workforce. Next slide. And I think we're going to do this, and then this is a nice segue right into the conversation around care court. So we also are proposing this year something called Behavioral Health Bridge Housing. That's $1.5 billion that's available to be used immediately over the course of the next 5 years to provide a variety of different housing and supports, specifically housing with supports, for those who are experiencing serious mental illness and are at imminent risk of homelessness. And what we have also done is prioritized that these resources be used on individuals who are participating in care court programs. Next slide. And I think this is just a picture, so we can keep going. So the transition here to talk about the new tool that we have proposed as an administration, and that we are currently having many conversations with our partners, obviously in the legislature, the judicial branch, all of you stakeholders who are also governmental entities and have responsibilities in various jurisdictions. So it's been a really enormous effort, but I think taking us back to the ground level, I think it's important to remember why we started thinking about this approach. And I think I'll speak for myself and this work that we're doing at agency. I think the most compelling part of this work is our real commitment to trying to prevent more restrictive conservatorships or incarceration for this particular population. I think we've seen so many systems. Many of us at agency have spent time working in diversion, working on programs that unfortunately we are just serving people too late, and too many bad things have happened. And in particular, becoming justice involved, or having to unfortunately lose your job, or et cetera. And I think we really wanted to really focus on mixing the things that I just mentioned at the beginning of the hour. How do we double down and make sure that we have the community placements with the supports that are needed to successfully serve somebody who has a very complex condition in the community? That's really at the heart of what we're trying to do with CareCourt. I think in terms of administering it, and what is really unique and different about it is really in similar models, and I would say even without any kind of a civil court or any kind of involvement, the participant, the person who is receiving services or participating in behavioral health services, it's really all about, well, are you failing or are you succeeding? What are you doing? Instead of, what is the system doing? What are we all doing to make sure that we're going to get to success? And I think this is really an effort for us to have another tool in our toolbox to make sure that all of us system partners are also being responsible in serving the needs of the participant, and really providing that level of care and treatment that's clinically appropriate and needed. Next slide. So I kind of like to start here with really trying to draw a couple of comparisons of why we felt developing care was important instead of tinkering with or making changes to some existing tools that we have. For one, we felt, similar to many things that you guys have read, that for the most part, we've got some really great tools in our LPS system, and we can really build something parallel to it per se, or that can utilize those tools as well. And so we didn't feel a need to tinker with the LPS at this time. We also felt that there were many things that we've learned from how Laura's Law has been implemented, both in our state, but also very notably in other states, which we spent a lot of time looking at. And I think care is very different than both LPS and Laura's Laws in a couple of really important ways. Probably one of the most important ways is that both local government as well as the participant, I think in the actual language of SB 1338, it uses the term respondent. That would be kind of what we would say, that's the consumer, that's the individual. But both are really held responsible and are accountable to the care plan. And I think that's very unique. Also, the petition to the court, or the request for someone to be considered for the care program, really can be initiated more directly to the court. And it can be from a variety of known people to the participant, family, clinicians, physicians, first responders. I think we even call out that this could be someone's spouse or adult child, etc. And also, we've really tried to design a process in which only credible petitions are pursued. And it is only after a credible petition is reviewed and deemed as credible that we then move to the process of a clinical evaluation to determine eligibility. And I think also because we really are trying to prevent conservatorship and incarceration in particular, we're not requiring that there's documentation that the individual has had a lot of these negative outcomes happen to them in order to be considered for the program. I think lastly, and something that I'm really excited about, we've been working with a lot of you to better understand how to make this really work and be useful and supportive, is that we are going to provide a supporter who will be specifically trained to assist in identifying, voicing, and centering the individual's care decisions in their care plan, and then later in their graduation plan, and really be used as a helpful tool that's provided in and outside of the care team. So this is not intended to be exchanged for peer support by any means. Peer support is a critical part of care that is a best practice that's used. And we see that as being an essential part of a strong care plan. The supporter is really there to work directly with the client, the individual, the consumer, the respondent, to elicit and represent that individual's direct needs and wishes of what they want to see in their care plan, potentially including where they're housed. We also are hopeful, if it's someone's choice, that they develop a psychiatric advance directive prior to graduation, so that we have documentation of the individual's desired wishes of what to do if a crisis ensues in the future. Next slide. So what is the clinical criteria for care court? Because it is very specific, and I'm sure we'll get some questions about this. It's definitely a far more narrow clinical criteria than our existing outpatient assistant program is, or other kind of civil court option. And so first and foremost, the individual must be diagnosed with a schizophrenia spectrum or other psychotic disorder, and whose judgment is so impaired by the symptoms of their illness. In this case, I'm talking to an audience who's well aware of these symptoms, positive symptoms like hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thinking, other forms of cognitive impairment that really impact the capacity of the individual to make medically necessary decisions about their care. And again, we specifically worked with a team of psychiatrists to develop this criteria and pair it with the appropriate clinical intervention, which is the care plan. And so I think we felt that this was really, really important to focus on this particular population, because they were the most at need, and frankly, because the illness itself can impair that medical decision-making capacity, and the clinical intervention, which we'll talk about in a moment, shows to be extremely effective with working with those symptoms and bringing back that ability to regain cognitive capacity. And so we'll get to that in just a moment. But what I mean by going into all that detail about the clinical criteria is that obviously that criteria really narrows the broad scope of individuals who are experiencing behavioral health crises. We expect and have estimated that statewide, this is probably somewhere between 7,000 to 12,000 Californians. The vast majority will be individuals who would be either on Medi-Cal or would be eligible for Medi-Cal services. Care court is not for everyone experiencing homelessness. And it is definitely, as I've mentioned, not for everybody experiencing even just mental illness, let alone behavioral health challenges. So I do want to be very clear about that and managing expectations. But again, it's one tool in a toolbox of lots of other tools that we've also discussed today in bettering our behavioral health system. Next slide. So I won't go through this in too much detail, but I will try to hit some of the highlights. And I guess the one thing I would caution and want to be super transparent about is, and Danny might mention this in some of his comments, we are actively working on amendments and meeting with all of you and learning about ways in which you think this could be designed better. And so as I'm kind of explaining things, I'm explaining them as they've been presented publicly so far. but we really are exploring. We want this to be as workable as possible. We want it to be something that we think can be incredibly successful. And so we are really open and thinking through ways to make it better with all of your expertise. So we've talked a little bit about the petition process. I mean, I think the main thing that is quite unique about this is that the petition is direct to the court. And at the petition process, the individual who's named in the petition will be provided a public defender as well as a supporter. And we feel that that's, important. But one of the things that we really heard from all of you, and I say that very broadly, from all the individuals we had listening sessions with around the state, as well as the ones we hosted at agency, is that we were really missing the boat, because there were a lot of people who probably want something and like a care plan, all of the good stuff in a care plan, they just haven't been offered it. And we really needed to do our due diligence to create a process within how Care Court is conceptualized, to make sure that people who want services can get them and voluntarily participate in them in a way that they may have not have been offered, and not have to participate in Care Court. So we have done our due diligence in trying to craft that process. And of course, we'll be interested in people's perspectives and on how to make that process work better. But the idea is that if there is this engagement process that ends in what the legislation calls, it's kind of wonky, but legal speak maybe, but it calls it a settlement agreement. But the idea is that the individual and the care team at the County Behavioral Health was really able to come up with a good resolution to treatment that could be utilized right away, and in a community-based setting. So if that is not the case, that agreement cannot be brought to, then there is kind of the triggering of what would be a court-ordered clinical evaluation by a licensed behavioral health provider to determine whether or not the person meets that strict criteria that I just mentioned, to proceed with Care Court proceedings. And so if that is the case, then we start the care plan development process. Obviously, people are going to have different trajectories and different needs. The statute does not outline that individuals have to be in court all the time by any means. I think there's a few required status conferences, but it may be the case that this is that there are rare court appearances or any need to be in the court. This is really about the care that's taking place in the community amongst the recipient, or I'm sorry, the respondent, the consumer, and the care team. And I think we're hopeful that at the end of 12 months, that there's been incredible success in engagement, stabilizing medication, housing, peer support services, family psychoeducation, services that if they're available in the county are being offered, and we've had success. There will be instances in where a person may not be ready to graduate from the Care Court program, and that will be assessed at that time. And that is about it for that. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, so I kind of thought I'd tee us up with a couple of the questions we get the most often. And I know we'll have a question and answer section after we hear from Danny, but I'm going to try to hit some of the big ones that get you guys thinking for other questions. But we get this a lot. Why doesn't care include all behavioral health conditions, or at least the conditions that are identified as serious and persistent mental health conditions in California state law? And I would say that, again, care is a really focused, it focuses on a particular diagnosis, because that diagnosis is highly responsive, and there is documented evidence in particular to stabilizing medication. And again, our goal is to rapidly get individuals well enough to direct design and get on the road to recovery. And so that is really why we are so focused on this narrow clinical criteria. And again, I just really want to underscore that there are significant broader behavioral health redesign efforts that are being led that are really intending to change. And frankly, to be honest with you, to intervene so early that things like this don't happen in a generation from now, that we have First Break and other programs available and accessible in everybody's communities so that we can really try to prevent these situations in the future, but we're simply not there. So again, we felt that specifically for care, we really needed to be narrow in our focus. Next slide. So does Care Court guarantee housing? Housing is a very important component of Care Court. And I think that at Health and Human Services, we've been saying for several years now, and it is really how we design our programs, especially as we bring our departments together for collaborative administration of programs like we did with our behavioral health infrastructure and our community care expansion fund program, that people, if they're living outdoors or they're living in a tent or a vehicle, they're experiencing unstable housing, they just really, how could you ever focus on your mental wellness if you have to have all of these other stressors in your life? It just simply is unreasonable to think that anybody could handle all of that. So we do feel that it's essential, and we do require that care plans have a housing plan, and that there is consideration in that housing plan on how to work with the individual so that they are choosing housing that is going to work for them. And with this population, it could be anything from a licensed residential setting to supportive housing, or frankly, with housing with families and friends. And you all on this call, many of you know that if you were given the kinds of support that you needed, and or your loved one was in a really strong program that was giving them the support that they need, then there potentially could be the ability for that individual to live at home with family and friends. As I mentioned earlier, we talked about the resources that are provided to acquire housing for this population, both the $1.5 billion in behavioral health bridge housing, and then of course the investments that have been made in the last couple of years, over $12 billion of investments in homelessness. And we really have been talking a lot to our city and county partners about how to make sure that the money that has been invested to date and in the future can really be targeting this population with their housing and homelessness efforts. All that being said, I'll be direct with all of you. We do not have a right to housing in this state. And I think that we are going to do everything in our power to make sure that this population is considered, thought of, in many ways, in some cases, prioritized for housing. But the state requiring housing at this point in time is not something that we're able to do. Next slide. So this is a little bit wonky for some of you, and some of you will know what I'm speaking of, but there was a piece of legislation that passed last year, SB 1317, which aimed to really address this growing problem of individuals being deemed IST who are staying in our jails. And so this is specific to misdemeanor ISTs, people who have been charged of a misdemeanor. They're tied up in criminal proceedings. And what we felt was important was to offer them a civil proceeding and a strong program if they met the clinical criteria. So, and we do think if someone is deemed incompetent to stand trial for a misdemeanor, it is potentially likely that they would meet the Care Court criteria. And so we certainly want Care Court to be an option for them and also to resolve any any of their criminal proceedings as well, and to get those taken care of and done away with. Next slide. What happens if an individual does not participate in a care court plan? It's a really good question. Since our goal is to try to make this a self-directed process, we felt that we wanted to empower the court to utilize existing tools at their disposal if it was obviously both warranted and consistent with the law. And so if the court determines at any time during these proceedings that the participant is not participating in care court, the court may terminate the respondent's participation in care court. And they just simply never come to any of the hearings. They don't want to be engaged. It is possible that that is what the court does. The court may also utilize their existing authority under LPS to ensure an individual's safety. I think, unfortunately, the concern here would be that if somebody has been identified as meeting the criteria for care court, especially if they've already, undergone the clinical evaluation and it was the desire to create a care court plan, the worry would be that this is somebody who's really unwell, and if they don't avail themselves of these tools and these resources, they may become so unwell and frankly more gravely disabled and at risk of danger to themselves or others. So they might meet the criteria for a 5150 hold, etc. Other tools that already exist as part of the LPS Act that we have. And then also at the care court may use these proceedings as a factual presumption that there are no suitable community alternatives to treat an individual. So this really has to do with conservatorship and the finding that this is a person who may be a suitable candidate for conservatorship if they materialize in that fashion. Okay, next slide. So I thought I would give you guys a couple of bullet points here on things that we have gotten a lot of feedback on and are really considering right now. Maybe they're good things for you to think about in terms of the questions you may have or the comments you want to make. But to date, we've received a lot of feedback, and these are a few of the things that are really kind of repetitive, kind of core themes of the feedback. As I mentioned before, people really wanted us to figure out a way to provide early services and supports and engagement for individuals who either wouldn't meet the criteria for care court and or just really had never been offered that level of service before. And we wouldn't want to miss an opportunity to engage people who want to be engaged in voluntary services. Certainly we heard that the services, including services in the least restrictive setting, which of course is the intent of care court, is to be community-based, is that they should be as voluntary in nature. We heard a lot about how important it would be for the supporter to be trained in supportive decision-making, as well as to do what we could to support the involvement of an additional peer support specialist who would be providing those specialty services as part of their ongoing care plan. We heard concerns, but also recommendations about the need to provide trauma-informed training, not just for first responders, but really for our courts and our court personnel. Clearly the need for a variety of different housing options and resources to support the participant. And frankly, because I'm super transparent, the request of all of you that counties and cities should be required to provide housing to care court participants. And And that even though we've been making proposals and have early investments into the behavioral health continuum, and that includes our kind of people capacity, our workforce capacity, that those just simply haven't materialized. And that we'll have to be very creative and also extremely supportive of our counties and our providers so that they have the capacity to do this work. And then also, as I've mentioned, a lot of people feel that the narrow eligibility criteria is really potentially going to lead to us missing our ability to reach other high need, high vulnerable populations. Next slide. I think this is about it. Okay. So I thought I would give a couple of examples because I think, I'll be frank, this is the part I struggle with too. Like mechanically, how does this really work? You know, what are their, how do we make it work better? And to be honest with you, these are the ones that like mechanically we're really thinking through, like, how can we make this a little bit better? How do we make this easier? But, you know, I think with the petition process, thinking of this audience, you know, the petition could come from a physician working in a public hospital who frankly has seen the same individual 12 times in the last 2 years on a 5150. And that could potentially be a petitioner. Oh, it could also potentially be an existing treating behavioral health professional. It could be a family member. I think one of the things we've really heard about the petition process is that we need to create a responsible balance so that there are not flippant or like just frivolous petitions. We don't want that either. That wastes everybody's time. At the same time, we also don't want to create so many barriers and make it so difficult that it's basically impossible to file a petition. And so working within those two extremes, we have drafted what we have drafted in the existing legislation, but I know that there will be all sorts, I know there's a lot of conversations about how to strengthen, not strengthen the process, but make it work better, to be honest. It's more about the mechanics. The settlement agreement is the same thing. You know, again, we want to create this voluntary opt-in. There's absolutely no need for a court-ordered plan, but also we have to figure out how to do it mechanically and in a way that makes sense and is in partnership with our county behavioral health partners who will be ultimately providing those services to those individuals if they do agree to a settlement agreement. And then lastly, graduation. I think, you know, these are some fair criticisms we've heard from you guys where, great, thanks for the year, you know, thanks for the 12 months, but what happens after that? Well, I believe that this is a great opportunity to transition somebody into the right kind of long-term care, and the graduation plan really gives the care team and the participant, the consumer, the respondent, the opportunity to design something that's going to work for them. And I think because there's kind of a long period, it really can work on this in the beginning. I think for those of you who know me very well, I know some of you do probably on this call, I spent a lot of time working in criminal justice settings, and you know, we work on rehabilitation or reentry plans the day somebody gets booked into our facility. That's we start the day they come in, thinking about the day they're going home, and that's the best way to support somebody long term. So this is some of the same thinking behind that, making sure that, you know, working on getting that placement or working on finding the right program that works for them, and maybe it's more culturally competent or it's in a better part of town that's closer to family, etc. Next slide. I think this is probably it. Yeah. So I wanted to put up that hyperlink. That link on our website has a couple of resources if you haven't been on it yet. But something that is new that I do want to point out, and it is specific to the current language, but we do have an updated FAQ from last week that we posted, I think on Monday, that really does dive into some of these details that for those of you who are really interested, I think it's actually a good read and it may answer some of your more technical questions. So with that, I'll pass it back over to Jessica.
Great, thanks, Steph. We have, by the way, hundreds of questions and comments, and so grateful for everybody's participation and all of the information that's coming. I'm going to throw it over to Danny very quickly and have him kind of do where we are at in the legislative process, what that means, and then how as those who are NAMI supporters here can help move this along. And then we're going to go into, I'm kind of putting all of the questions into buckets because there's just so many, and we'll move right into there. So Danny, you want to go ahead and take it away?
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks, Stephanie. Hey, everyone. I will be very brief because I know we have, as Jessica said, hundreds of questions with 30 minutes to go. And anything I have to tell you right now will mostly be redundant because NAMI California will be sending out advocacy updates all throughout this process to help you along, to let you know, to trigger you when you need to engage again along the process. So just where we are right now, last week we just passed out of 2 policy committees on the Senate side. First, it went through the Judiciary Committee and then out of Health. So it now has to go to the Fiscal Committee, which is the Senate Appropriations Committee. It was initially set for next Monday, but that has been pushed back. So I believe it will probably be Monday, May 16th. However, the caveat is the bill will most likely first go to the Senate Appropriations Suspense File. And this means any bill that is estimated to cost the state more than $50,000 gets put on suspense. The committee discusses it for a week or 2 or more, depending on when the deadline is to get it out of the Fiscal Committee. And then it either passes or it fails and it gets held there. So long story short, there won't be really much of an opportunity to advocate for the Appropriations Committee because since it will go to suspense, the members will probably not even present on the bill when it's heard on Monday, May 16th. So the next stop for advocacy will be when it gets to the Senate floor. So what you'll want to do then is thank you to everybody who sent in letters. I've bundled them all and I'm using those to lobby all of the legislature. But it would be really helpful too if any of you who are willing to be able to call your representative. And I just wanted to walk you through that process really quick, just so you can see how you would go about doing it. And I'm going to just do it straight from Google because I can give you the web addresses, but I feel like it's, sometimes we lose the address or whatever. And so you would just type in California, find my representative, click there, and then you just put in, your address. Locate. And then it will show you, okay, state Senate. So my representative would be State Senator Richard Pan. So then I would click here and it should take me directly to his website. You find his phone number under contact, and then you would just call them up and say, hi, my name is Danny Offer with NAMI California. I was hoping to chat with whoever staffs your boss on health issues. You want to talk to his staffer on health issues. And then, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get put into voicemail, but don't despair, still leave a voicemail. Also ask if you can have that staff member's email address so you can shoot them an email. But most importantly, if any and all of you can send in your letters to us, and we will make sure that all of them get to all the members of the legislature. Then once it passes out of the Senate, it goes over to the Assembly side and it has to do the whole policy committee process again. It will most likely be double referred, which means it will go to the Judiciary Committee and the Health Committee. Once it gets there, we'll let you know all of the members who are on those committees, and we will want to directly target lobbying those members. So say, for instance, you go to the Committee on Health, and this will be all the legislators who are on the Health Committee. And if you looked before to see who represents you from here, you can see if any of these people are on that committee. For example, for me, my rep is Assembly Member Kevin McCarty, and he just happens to be on the Health Committee. So we would contact his office and do the same process as for the other staffers. That's essentially the process of how it would work for lobbying. So we got to get through the Senate first, and then we'll go on to the Assembly, and we'll make sure to send out any updates to you when we need advocacy, we need calls, and we need letters. But I think that is about it for now. So I will stop my screen share and kick it back over to you, Steph.
Thanks so much, Danny. And yes, thank you to everybody here who has been supportive of the Care Court initiative, sent in. We've had hundreds of NAMI family member letters that have gone through the legislative process. And we continue to work with our peer partners whom, you know, we respect their point of view. And in a lot of ways, if you haven't seen NAMI California's support letter, really integrated a lot of the concerns that we also have about racial disparities and about making sure there's no malicious petitions, and that that we're really focused on the individual within the scope of what Care Court is offering. And so you can go to our website if you want to read our full support letter. We get all of our, some people have been asking about how does NAMI California get their support for certain pieces of legislation. So this piece of legislation, as well as other initiatives, we survey our members. We have a public policy platform. You know, we represent at NAMI families and individuals who are impacted by mental illness. And so that has varying points of view. But for the most part, we work with our affiliates and our members to really hear from them. We hear from focus groups throughout the year. We do an annual state of the report for families and what the needs are for families. And this consistently pops up as a specific need, especially for those who have loved ones with the most severe and persistent mental health condition, serious mental illness. So with that being said, again, we had about 125 questions. Won't be able to get to all of them. Some of them were comments, great insight. We'll make sure to pass those, some of those suggestions on as well, because some of them are wonderful suggestions. But I will go into the first one is, Stephanie, everybody wants to know if the slides are going to be shared. Can we share these slides on our website? Okay. Yeah. So we will go ahead and we will put that the slides on our website, and maybe even send out a wrap up with the slides attached to it for those people who maybe couldn't come. So there were several questions about the supporter role and training for the supporter role. Have you guys thought that through yet, or is that still one of those things that's being worked out?
Yeah, a couple of ways to answer that. We have heard from our disability rights community partners and others who are kind of experts in supportive decision making that it's really important that the individual have a choice in who the supporter is, including if they want that supporter to be a family member or a loved one, spouse, sibling, etc. Could be your best friend, your neighbor. Those are important things. I think what we're balancing is that we also really want to make sure that we offer training in supportive decision making, and training to make sure that for those supporters that we do contract for through our Department of Aging, which is where we have placed that responsibility in our proposal. The Department of Aging has a long history of advocacy for individuals, obviously individuals who are older and aging, but also individuals who are living with complex medical conditions. And just I think that with some of the new things we're doing over there, it's a great opportunity to utilize the skill set that department has to really focus on developing the supporter program, and in particular ensuring that for those supporters that we contract with, that they are well trained in supportive decision making, but also of course boundaries, working with people with serious and persistent mental illness, etc. And we also have identified that certainly will be a process to develop that training. We identify in the statute that the Department of Aging will work with peers and stakeholders and family members to develop the kind of training that is going to be the most effective. I think the one thing I would really underscore with this question is that the supporter is not intended to replace peer support and this specialty skill that certified peer support services provide. That is an essential part we feel belongs in the care plan. Now, does that mean that somebody who is a trained certified peer supporter, that maybe they want to become a trained supporter? That is possible, I suppose. But I hope that clarifies a little bit. We are kind of working through some other details. We want to be true to the model. We also recognize that we have 58 counties. We have implementation timelines. And while we want everybody to have a choice of a supporter, we're just mechanically trying to figure out how to make that a realistic thing in such a big state with some counties that are obviously very small, rural, etc. I think also we're looking at things like making sure that if you don't want, maybe you don't want a supporter at all, you don't have to have one. We probably weren't clear about that when we were working on the legislation, but certainly that makes sense. If you don't want to, kind of like if you want to self-petition, you can. Some of the things that, we're just in all these great conversations we've had with people like you, we're like, oh, we should have thought of that. That's a great idea. That makes total sense. So I hope that helps answer the question, but I'm sure you guys will be involved and engaged in. And I would also encourage you all, there will also be training resources and training needs for our court partners. And I think it'll be really important for NAMI to be at the table thinking through what some of that looks like. And maybe you guys already do some of that, whether you do it locally or at the state level, about the importance of family in service design. So some of those things, getting to Danny's point about process, will be introduced as part of the governor's May revision, kind of that will outline what the resources are going to our various different departments to support things like training and technical assistance, evaluation. I know you haven't asked that question yet, Jess, but I would say that we did not put in the first set of language a really elaborate set of data, because we wanted to really negotiate that and get people's good ideas. But I definitely think that collecting data in a responsible way is going to be critical for us to monitor what we already all know, which is that there is an overrepresentation, particularly of Black men who are homeless, and an overrepresentation and a misdiagnosis of the same population with schizophrenia. So that is well documented, and but it doesn't mean that we should not move forward. We need to address that instead, look at the data and figure out how to make some serious inroads with those two statistics that we should be very unhappy with and propelled to do better work in.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just to follow up on the kind of the supporter question, there's been a lot of questions about HIPAA, and like, if you're a supporter, are the laws for HIPAA going to be the same? Like, if a family member is considered the supporter, will they have access to health records that HIPAA oftentimes denies?
Not an expert, so I think I'd want to get back to you because it's a technical legal question, but okay. My gut would say the supporter's role is to really interpret and bring voice to the wishes and needs of the client. So I don't see why the supporter would necessarily even need access to those kinds of records. They wouldn't be necessarily utilizing them for any purpose. Now, I think there are a lot of questions around the appropriateness, and appropriateness meaning the confidentiality of records and the flow of information with the petitions, with gathering the information to do the clinical assessment. And we're really looking into some of those things now. We want to obviously follow the law and ensure that we are protecting people's confidentiality. At the same time, we don't want to make it too burdensome to get access to records that are needed to help determine someone's immediate, more urgent care needs.
So then I guess on the flip side too, then would the supporter be able to share? I mean, obviously not medical records, but be able to share information about the individual? It would just be to the courts then, right? The supporter would be able to advocate to the courts or to the county the needs of the individual.
So the supporter would be communicating those, I think, all around. The individual dynamics are going to be different. So I can't speak to, one family versus another, but I do think that, as part of the care team, it'll be directed by the care team and with the client themselves to figure out how to involve the family.
Yeah.
I think one thing that we have said, and I really hope, it takes off. And I know that there's lots of counties that believe this as well, is, just how important it is to do psychoeducation. We mention it in the statute. We hope that there is, and I believe that there will be, there's not a doubt in my mind that there won't, just figuring out how to work with the family and support all of those people in an individual's network that want to support that person in their recovery and wellness. And that includes, family members, but friends, and others.
Yeah, we had actually several questions about that, like family and friends are frontline oftentimes and need support in terms of family support. So thank you for answering that. And thank you for, the not priority, but for putting it forward in a way, because oftentimes, families and supporters kind of get lost and shifted to the side, but this is a family illness in a lot of ways, and we're all impacted by it. And the stories that we hear on a daily basis on the pain and the agony of family members that they're going through, are unimaginable. So, okay, there was a couple of questions, and this is actually something I haven't actually heard of. What if somebody is not part of Medi-Cal, Medicare, has some sort of private insurance? How do they get into any of this? Is CareCourt available? And are we able to maybe work with healthcare providers to bill them for this? How does that work? Because there's a lot of our families who have private, medical insurance and don't have sometimes access to some of these greater programs that are available to those people in Medi-Cal.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to have county behavioral health serve those individuals and bill their commercial plans.
Great.
So we're working with the counties and our legal folks to make sure that it's drafted correctly and is going to meet those needs. But no, I mean, I think this shouldn't be a program that's just for people who are Medi-Cal beneficiaries. That's not, that isn't how we're trying to approach any of the work that we're doing in California around behavioral health care. All Californians should have access to quality behavioral health care.
Good. I love that. And then there was a few questions about those people who are either already in conservatorship or maybe even in jail already. How could they have access to the CareCourt program? And is that something that they can, either they themselves or their family members can petition them to move from jail into CareCourt?
Yeah, I mean, let me start with conservatorship, because I do think we see this as an appropriate, I mean, similar to how it's been drafted, I think in assisted outpatient treatment, that this could be a step down from a conservatorship. Again, our goal with CareCourt is to create a tool for this group of folks that is going to ultimately prevent conservatorship. So if there are folks who are in conservatorship who meet the criteria, I think it's definitely something to explore, and we intended it that way. Little bit more sticky widgets when it comes to criminal justice, but certainly we did create the off-ramp, so to speak, to CareCourt for individuals who are IST misdemeanants. In terms of other people who are quote unquote in jail, we want to get them out of jail. I don't know, that's different because it depends on what the criminal charges are. Obviously, if I had a magic wand, I would do it. I don't like to see anyone with with behavioral health conditions spending any time in jail that they don't need to. But I think certainly we're definitely thinking with that lens when we think about who can petition. Certainly we'll want to make sure that our partners in public safety are aware of care court, so that they also, as you know, Jessica, like we talk about this a lot, they don't want these folks who need better help and care in the community in their jails either. So we do see them as potentially a partner. And again, one of the goals of care court is to prevent incarceration.
Yeah. And so we also had a question, and this is an interesting concept, and it's kind of like an access question, just about if somebody is in care court and their county doesn't have maybe the programs, could they go across county? Could they be suggested to go to another program in another county, just to make sure that every patient has access to programs?
Well, tough county question. I wish I was on a panel so I could toss it to a county colleague, but a couple of things. One is that county behavioral health, as the contracted provider of specialty Medi-Cal mental health services, has to supply a basic level of care that should be able to meet the needs of this individual. That's something that they're contractually obligated to do as our provider. So now, are those services as fantastic as a particular neighboring community? Maybe not. Maybe there's just different circumstances. Maybe they're a small or rural county, or maybe they've just had some particular challenges with workforce. I don't think that there's any provisions in now to move people around counties. I think we're actually struggling with that a little bit, because how much people move around and maybe out of their county of residence when a petition is filed. But in terms of arranging for someone to go to a different county, I don't think that's really in the cards.
Okay. And then a follow-up to that, somebody asked a great question: how can we hold counties accountable to make sure that these types of services are available?
Well, that's really what the court is there to do. I know that so much, probably 75% of the attention and the questions that I've been getting are about why. I don't understand why there's a need for a court. I think that we feel that there is a need for the court to ensure that this population that we feel is ultimately potentially one of the most vulnerable, if not the most vulnerable population in the state, that we have the support, and that courts have a tool to hold counties accountable to providing care to this population. So that is much of the oomph behind the reason why this is a civil process. It is to have that ability to hold local governments accountable for these services.
And then kind of to tag onto that, and I know that this is something that the administration has really been thinking about, and what they've been hearing from counties is the workforce. Can you maybe explain a little bit? I know you did in the beginning part about the funding, and we will have these slides available so that people can really study. There's so many different funding streams. It's not just MHSA. It's not just, Medi-Cal. It's several different funding streams. And the idea is to keep counties, not just county behavioral health, but the full county accountable. But can you talk about the workforce problem? It's a real problem, right? And what the administration is trying to do to.
Yeah, it's definitely a really big problem. I spend much of my time, especially in the last few weeks, trying to think of and talk to people about creative, innovative ideas that will result in more bodies now. And so it is a real problem. At the same time, what we have said, in particular with Care Court, as I mentioned, we think at most there's 12,000 people. Obviously, there's implementation issues. This is not, we want to be as expedient and as expedient as possible. And I think that there are some communities, courts, whatever term you want to use. I try not to just say the term county, because there are lots of things within county land. You've got different cities and things like that. We got people who are ready to go. Like they see this as a literal crisis in their community. And when you have a crisis, you respond like it's a crisis. And I think I've been saying that for maybe the whole time I've been in this position during the COVID epidemic when it comes to behavioral health. We're really trying to recalibrate ourselves to think about how do we respond in a crisis? Maybe we need to get more creative. And so we are exploring ways to do that. And I know that our counties and our providers on the front lines are exhausted and frustrated. And we're hoping that this will not be an additional thing to do, but an additional tool to serve a population that still in many ways is being served and draining resources in the community, but just not in a productive, healthy way. You know, they're still unfortunately having to be transported in ambulances to hospitals, spending time in hospitals, spending time in jail, and potentially spending time, of course, on our streets where we know that they're much more likely to be victims of assault, crime. You know, in talking to frontline providers, doing the research around care court, we heard often that it wasn't even so much a psychiatric crisis where they saw someone repetitively in the emergency department. It was instances of, you know, being mugged, being injured, you know, being attacked, and things that we really need to address with all urgency and frankly just figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah. Some people were asking about, you know, at the Senate, one of the Senate committee meetings, the need for more judges. You know, we know, and those people who are here from Santa Clara County know that Judge Manley is kind of the gold star in a lot of ways around this sort of compassion court order treatment type of a thought. Is there a plan to, if this rolls out statewide, like training more judges, getting mental health courts in place in every county? And have we thought about that at all?
Yeah, so we are going to train more judges, and that is a part of the responsibility of the Judicial Council as our partner in designing and administrating care court. So, but I think you have a really important, as well as resources for public defenders. We absolutely know that they are terribly under-resourced and do need support to be active participants in care court as well, because they play an important role. But no, I mean, I think you make a really important point, and I hope that this is one of those issues or a proposal that really brings to light how much more work we have to do in this space, and make sure that we are talking about and working and building relationships with all of our court partners, right? It's not just the judge, but it's the public defender and the district attorney, even our partners in the public safety realm, like probation, and I would even potentially put like our partners in the public guardian's office in that category as well. I mean, I think that there's always a need for more education, but I can at least flag for you, or you know, at least share with you, Jessica, that we've flagged it as a concern. And also, just to be clear, that while this is a civil court proceeding, we do think that the strategies around collaborative courts are really effective. I think also some of the ways in which courts are handled in family court or in dependency court are really models that we're looking to, so that the court itself, the court could be virtual, the court could be in a home-like environment, the court could be in the community. Really want to get creative and innovative in order to not only actively engage people, but clearly make it as least traumatizing as it could be, as we know that potentially a court process is nerve-wracking and anxiety can be, you know, cause anxiety for many.
Yeah, I think somebody made a point here that, you know, making sure that caseload standards for mental health providers and child welfare and parole and probation, that without kind of these standards, state and county budgets will not need to add employee codes, to hire more staff. And so really it's like training people as this rolls out, making sure that not only the standards for caseloads is important, but training all of the people along the way to understand what care court is supposed to do, and also to have the compassion and to understand that this is treatment, not jail, right? Like we want to divert people. We want to make sure that people, our loved ones, as a mom, I just couldn't imagine, I have, younger children, but I couldn't imagine my son being on the streets and not having care, and me as a mother not being able to provide that basics, need for my kid. And I'll get choked up just thinking about my own kids, let alone the hundreds of thousands of family stories that we hear every single day. It is something that, for us at NAMI means so much that the administration kind of heard NAMI in a lot of ways of, we have to make sure it's not for everybody. And we stand alongside our peer partners in a lot of the issues of making sure that people have choice, and that, their civil rights are cared for, and we still stand behind that. But there are some times in certain cases where we have to intervene in ways to save people's lives. So there's so many questions still, Steph, and I know we don't have a lot of time. I want to thank everybody. Stephanie, I know that this is something that you have worked very hard on. Dr. Mark Galley has worked very hard on. The administration is making it a priority, of course. And I just want to thank you, because I know that you work 14 to 16-hour days on this. I've said it before, I'll say it in this public forum. There's no other person that I think that we would rather have than you at the helm of this issue, but also within the administration, because you understand from your own personal story, from your experience working in every single level, you understand this issue better, I think, than anybody else. And so we're so grateful for your thoughtfulness, for your willingness to listen to all points of view and to try and come up with the best answer. So thank you so much.
Wow. Well, thank you for lifting me up before I go to my next meeting. That's very kind of you. I appreciate everybody giving me your time today. And, I think as I said, we're considering amendments. We also have budget proposals that are going to come out with some more details. So whether it's a town hall or some other forum, maybe it's an article or something like that, Jessica, but we're here, we're listening. I look forward to hearing or seeing maybe more of their comments or questions. Your questions always help us think better and are well appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for participating. We will be posting the recording of this webinar. We'll be posting the slides. Danny, we also had kind of some questions about, can we post on our website instructions on to letter writing to get people involved? We'll definitely be doing all of that. As Danny said, we will be getting you guys involved. Thank you all for your comments. I'm sorry if we couldn't get to all of them. There was some really good suggestions in here, Stephanie, too, so I'll make sure to share those with you as well. But thank you all. Stay informed. Make sure we all have an open mind about this, because this is helping our family members, our loved ones, ourselves, and we want to make sure that whatever we support, we would support doing it for ourselves as well. So thank you so much for everything, and we're going to sign off.
Bye-bye.